I'm Andy Parsons. I'm the director of the Content Authenticity Initiative at Adobe. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to focus on three areas, kind of make sure you understand to the best of my ability what we're doing, why Adobe is doing this, and why now. I'm going to give you sort of a look at some user interfaces to make this more concrete so you can see how this looks in Photoshop. And then we're going to talk about some of the standards, because at the end of the day, this as an Adobe only initiative doesn't really mean much until we can have participation from social media, really any players on the web, mobile applications, Adobe competitors, hardware, software, the whole gamut of content creation and delivery. Then this will not impact consumers. And we're on a journey that is really just beginning. We're about 2 years in to make this kind of a de facto standard. I'd go so far to say what we're really after with the broad coalition and the Content Authenticity Initiative is restoring trust and transparency on the web. I think I mentioned this last time and had shared with Ron. I had the great honor and distinction of speaking candidly with Vint Cerf, one of the fathers of the modern web. And I asked him, if you could go back in time and add a layer of transparency and a trust model to the web itself, would you have done that? And he sort of laughed and said, without question, had we been able to see this impending future of synthetic media, which isn't all bad, but the notion of what we're talking about today is transparency so that consumers and fact checkers and folks at Harvard University can understand with transparency what they're dealing with and make up their own minds about whether to trust it. So with that, briefly why we're here. Adobe about 2.5 years ago, as all of us, witnessed an incredible uptick in advances in artificial intelligence for creative uses, things that were once the kind of relegated to the realm of Hollywood and tens of millions of dollars of budget for special effects were very, very quickly becoming the realm of a handheld device and the supercomputer that's in every one of our pockets. And we looked as a company at that and said, look, among the many other pioneers in this space, Adobe is going to be building these tools to make creators' lives easier, to enable them to reach ever new heights in creativity. And we need to be able to enable them to do that responsibly. And the way we do that is to give them this idea of content authenticity so that they can cryptographically assert who they are, what they use to do something, and with all of the privacy sort of assertions and understanding that you would expect, allow them to show their work, if you will. And lastly, we saw, as we all have, this incredible uptick in the velocity of content. Gone are the days when there were 3 networks and everybody got their news from 3 different places and their entertainment from 3 different places. Now every one of us and all of our relatives, friends, enemies are all sort of newscasters of our own accord. And followers, the notion of viral content is just part of everyday lives, obviously. And with that comes an intent to deceive, to use these same powerful, accessible, AI-driven tools, many of them free and open source or low cost in Adobe's own suite of tools, available to people who don't mean well and don't mean to use these for creative pursuits, but rather for deceptive, malicious pursuits. And therefore, we want to try to make headway in the next few years, restoring transparency, adding trust, and proper attribution for content. I don't have to go into too many of these examples. We've all seen it. Ron, sort of touched on some of these, but not a day goes by that either in the political realm or even more insidious realms where you might not expect it, you see what are called cheap fakes. This is the miscontextualization of content. Could be an Australian wildfire miscontextualized to purport to be happening in California, or even more deleterious, approaches to deepfake porn and things that can put vulnerable communities and women, it's sometimes in physical harm, certainly reputational harm, and on and on. There are just countless examples. And now you have the onslaught of deepfakes and synthetics, where sometimes people ask me, "How do I know, Andy, this is you even giving this presentation?" And I say, "Well, it is, but how do you really know?" You might not know. People say we haven't seen the onslaught of deepfakes that some folks are predicting that is, apocalyptic and upon us. And my answer back to them is, how would you know? There are incredibly powerful photorealistic, audio-realistic tools that are available right now. So we looked at a number of facets. We know that education and media literacy to consumers and fact checkers and folks to whom this stuff really matters is key, and we're doing a lot there. I'm not going to focus on that today. We also looked at detection. That is sort of post hoc detecting whether something might be fake or maliciously intended. And I think we need to look no further than about a year ago, the results that were revealed in the Deepfake Detection Challenge, co-sponsored by Microsoft, Partnership on AI, Facebook. I sit on the Media Integrity Steering Committee at Partnership on AI, so sort of had a front row seat to how this all unfolded, and observed as the winning algorithm, which was looking at 10-second videos and classifying them as likely fake or likely real, had only a 65% hit rate. And of course, at Twitter, Facebook, YouTube scale, TikTok scale, that's not much better than a coin toss. I think the accuracy over time will go down, and we need to be left with another way to indicate, to have and attain an understanding of what something is, and again, whether to trust it. So I'm going to now jump into these three areas I described to give you a little understanding of what the Content Authenticity Initiative is, what the software and standards are that underlie it, what we've done to date, and the tremendous work ahead. And invite you all to join in the initiative, and then, as I said, show you some examples. So instead of guessing what's false, which is the notion of detecting what something was and how it's made, we can prove what's true. Now, I always give a little caveat. The word true is a fraught term. When we're talking about truth in this context, we're talking about certifiable, cryptographically verifiable truth about how something was made. We're not talking about the veracity of what was depicted. If you have somebody standing up on TikTok and spouting mistruths and disinformation, we're not solving that problem. That's a human and a sociological problem. But we can tell you how that video was made, perhaps who made it, where it was made, and make sure that metadata content is cryptographically attached to the content itself and will travel wherever that content goes. So this is just a brief overview. Every time I show this slide, it's a little bit out of date. We now have well over 500 members. So the Content Authenticity Initiative is an Adobe-led initiative. We fund all of the activities of the Content Authenticity Initiative, including some quarterly events, also community, soon to be open source communities to help build some of these things into all the products I mentioned up front, including hardware and software. And this is a cost center for Adobe. This is not a revenue generator, is not intended to be. This is something that's part of Adobe's digital citizenship push forward over the next few years. And we know that this cannot be an Adobe-only initiative, as I said, so we've embraced a broad range of partners. These are just a few of them. And now, as I said, there are over 500, ranging from human rights defenders to publishers to other technology companies and academic experts as well. So what is the CAI? We're focusing on my team on 4 key areas. One is specifying standards, eventually destined, we hope, for W3C, ISO, IETF, and others, via a consortium called the C2pa. That's the Coalition on Content, Provenance, and Authenticity. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. That's in the Linux Foundation. We formed that standards body specifically to write the technical standards as we implement them in Creative Cloud and other Adobe apps, and partners do the same, including Microsoft, who's a key founding member with us. And we knew that this kind of activity couldn't take place under the auspices of a single company, but rather should be a true consortium with a governance model and run under a nonprofit. So we look to the Linux Foundation to do that. The second thing we do is implement these ideas to me and my colleagues and our partners inside and outside Adobe. Nothing speaks louder than working code. It's one thing to wave our hands and say, we're solving this massive societal problem. Here's a document, here's a white paper. We want to always be working in parallel to show these things in action on the ground. And I'll, again, show you some examples in a moment. And that's done through collaborating with members to co-develop the standard, and when it reaches 1.0, to put these things into production. Third, I touched on education advocacy. Unless consumers and others in the ecosystem understand what to make of these trust signals that we're trying to bring to the web and the mobile ecosystem, and eventually perhaps even the metaverse, this won't mean much. So in parallel with the development of the technical standards, the code, we want to make sure that the society around us is ready and willing and able to understand what this is for and how to use it. And lastly, of course, building this stuff into the Creative Cloud. All of the open source we'll produce and release next year will be the very code that's running inside of Photoshop and Premiere Pro and our other professional creative tools. So what we're really talking about is digital provenance. This has kind of become the term of art that people use to refer to what we're building in the CAI, and it's that ground truth about how an asset was made. And I want to point out here that if you were to do a collage or bring multiple ingredients, if you will, into a video or an audio asset or an image, all of those assets would bring along their provenance data and their history, revealing whatever the creator of those assets meant to share, and then creating sort of a graph of provenance. And just like, well, frankly, the word provenance comes from the art world. If you buy a Picasso painting, you want to be pretty sure, as much as you can be, about the ownership, provenance, the history of it, who owned it, and track it all the way back to Pablo Picasso's paintbrush. And we're trying to accomplish the same thing here with digital provenance. We have two very critical key product concepts in the software we're building around this stuff inside and outside Adobe. One is to make it as simple as possible for photographers, videographers, anybody capturing media or creating media to publish this information with the proper respect paid towards privacy and all the things that you may or may not want to share. And second is to make it intuitive and eventually expected for all content we encounter online to contain provenance info. So if you're scrolling through your Twitter feed and you're in news mode, we'd love to see consumers enabled to say, look, only show me cryptographically verified provenance data, images, text, and don't show me other stuff that may creep in that doesn't have this data. And these things go together. As the easier it is to create this data and attach it to your content, the more expected it's going to be to appear downstream. This is a very simplistic diagram. I know this is a fairly technical audience, so I'll breeze through this. This shows kind of the accumulation of that provenance data, the CAI data, from the creation, in this case, taking a photograph at the top, or we might have the creator indicated with various types of identity, what tools were used, what camera was used, traditional information, but now cryptographically attached to the media coming off the camera. An editing phase, which might use Photoshop or Adobe's Lightroom, then a publishing, a sharing, and eventually a viewing scenario. And you can see down on the bottom there, the viewing stage has a little icon that indicates, hey, this contains provenance. Now, again, we're not telling you to trust this image of mountains or not. We're saying there is information here for you to make up your own mind. Click here, mouse over, touch here, and learn more about what this actually is. And it will be for platforms to decide with that data whether to show this to you at all or whether to flag it with a warning, as we've seen Twitter and Facebook experiment with, especially in the political realm. But what the standard will do is enable this data to exist and for platforms to make use of it. This is a quick look at kind of the more technical zoomed in view of what we call the C2pa Manifest. So again, harkening back to the standards document that will be published hopefully in the next couple of weeks, certainly targeted for January to reach a 1.0 status. This shows you a number of versions of an image or a piece of media, audio, video, and how it accumulates over time different cryptographically signed pieces of metadata, which all together tell the story of how this image in this case came to be. We've got a number of guiding principles beyond the ones I mentioned earlier. Again, I can't mention privacy enough. We don't want this to be perceived or in any way used as a surveillance tool for big tech companies or governments. This is meant for people to share as a matter of public record, whatever they wish to share. And at the end of the day, the very minimal CAI set of data is a thumbnail in terms of an image and a timestamp, a secure assigned timestamp, of course. Beyond that, we can share all sorts of information if we're making NFTs or selling art online about the identity of the creator. I could be Banksy, I could be Andy Parsons. We have those cryptographic assurances not to share data that a creator does not intend to share. And then I'll skip to the bottom to interoperability. We want to make sure that no matter what company or individual is creating an implementation using the standard, that it can interoperate. Images created in one application or with one piece of hardware can be shown and modified in another one in a responsible way. And lastly, extensibility. I mentioned the metaverse half jokingly earlier. The truth is we don't know at Adobe or in the consortium building the standard what the future of media, news, and sharing content will be. And we want to make sure there are the proper extensibility facets in the standard, and we're doing that as well. So, very quickly, let me show you kind of where we are and what the actual activities of the Content Authenticity Initiative have been. We announced this in 2019 at Adobe Max, which is Adobe's annual creator conference. Now that it's virtual, it has something like 200 million video views, 500,000 attendees. And I think going into the future, we'll continue to have that broad reach, even in a hybrid environment. But we announced at Max 2019, in partnership with Twitter and the New York Times, our initial kickoff partners, got to work right away, kind of understanding where Adobe could be relevant and where a standard could really push these ideas forward. We published a white paper summarizing those ideas in August of last year, of 2020. We unveiled a version of Photoshop to do some testing with this functionality built into it for creators. in October of last year. That was last year's Max. We moved on to demonstrate how this might work in hardware in partnership with Qualcomm and a company called TruePic. And then in February of this, we founded that standards organization under the Linux Foundation to get to work on taking the white paper forward into a ratifiable standard that will eventually find its way to the W3C and others. And then we moved on to do work with the New York Times, Reuters, Stanford University to create still more of these proofs of concept for still images. In September, we released a draft C2pa specification, which is available now if you visit C2pa.org. And in addition to kind of the esoteric details of how this is intended to work, you can also find corollary documents about user interface recommendations, sort of non-normative guidance, most importantly, perhaps, around privacy, threat modeling, harms modeling, and all of those kinds of things. This year at Max, just a few weeks ago, we unveiled a production beta version of what we call content credentials in Photoshop, which I'll show you in just a moment. And that is, again, these ideas manifest inside Adobe's flagship product for anyone to use. This is available for anyone who has Photoshop installed. And looking forward to early 2022, we will release via that Linux Foundation Standards Development Organization the 1.0 version of the specification underlying all of this, as well as those documents that I mentioned. These are the founding members of the C2pa. It's Adobe, Microsoft, BBC, ARM, TruePic, Intel. Twitter also recently joined as a steering committee member, and we've got some exciting additional steering committee members coming online. And I think this has matured quite a bit even since I last visited with Angel Beat and Ron just a few months ago. As I mentioned, this is run inside the Linux Foundation under a very straightforward IP-free, this is the IPR policy the W3C uses. There's no licensing, there's no intellectual property whatsoever. Everything is provided under Creative Commons. It's about as open as it could possibly be. These specs will be available in early 2022. And for now, they'll address images and video, with audio kind of hot on the heels as our next area to explore. And as I said, also these other documents that explain what to consider when you're building implementations, particularly around the areas of user interface so that consumers and users can understand what this is. Those are critically important and will also be released in a 1.0 version in about a month. So, let me briefly show you what this actually looks like, hopefully to make it a little bit more concrete. And I'd urge everyone listening and watching to extend these ideas to audio and video. I'm going to show you images. Frankly, we started with images, number one, because, the eponymous Photoshop, the verb, the noun is used to talk about manipulating images. We wanted to provide this responsible use there first. But these ideas I'll show you are equally applicable to the other media formats as well, and streaming formats, audio and video. So here we have Photoshop. This is the feature that we call content credentials that implements the standard. You can see what we're going to capture in this preview panel. It shows you that assets were imported, that things were combined. You might see that AI tools were used. And again, if you're scrolling through that Twitter feed and you see provenance data and you see something flagged as AI tools being used, you might want to take a close look at a before and after thumbnail to say, was the sky altered in tone? Was a police officer removed? Was an ambulance added? Those kinds of things that we just have to wonder about and scratch our heads and rely on human fact checkers, we can now push into the hands of consumers and others to say, I want to know what this is. Let me reveal that transparency with the tap or click of a mouse, etc. And you can see also, in this case, we've decided to include our identity. So we have social media accounts. We can also attach crypto accounts, Web3 accounts. So as long as we can prove ownership of different kinds of accounts to bolster our identity, we can include those as well. So this is showing snow on the pyramids of Giza. Of course, this is kind of tongue-in-cheek fake news that never happened. Here's what this will look like on social media. So once you create this in Photoshop, export it, upload it to a social media site. In this case, this is live on Adobe's own Behance social media platform for creators. You can see that same data we captured, now cryptographically signed by Adobe, which is effectively vouching for the information captured in Photoshop. And we can see that the stock image that came in of the pyramids did not have snow. It does have provenance data, which we can explore. Snow was added, AI tools were used, other adjustments were made, and we can compare what those adjustments were if we click View More and go to a site that is also live called verify.contentauthenticity.org. And this will show you a little more of a forensic view of all the details, revealing all the information that we've captured and attached to this particular version of this image. And there are different views here. We're experimenting with user interfaces that show more of a family tree or genomic view, if you will, that shows which of these came in with provenance data, which ones came from Adobe stock or Getty Images. And again, you can click on each one of those and explore its history. And you can even do a before and after comparison. We did a little, trickery around resizing and lining these things up, but the images you're seeing there are in the provenance data itself. We don't have any registry of images. This is data that travels with the images and the assets as they make their way around the internet. And can even be shared in private chat applications too. We have designs on ensuring that will work. Here's the same thing. The New York Times did this experiment with our code and some of their web developers on the NYT R&D site. This is also live. They call this process secure sourcing, and they were particularly interested in showing who the producer was, who the photographer was, and what tools were used to produce it, to provide that kind of transparency to New York Times readers. And this is one of the projects I'm most proud of. We worked with Reuters and a group in blockchain research at Stanford University called the Starling Lab. And Starling, Reuters, and my team at Adobe on content authenticity put together this expose, this sort of tiled history of the 78 days between the US presidential election and Joe Biden's administration's inauguration this year. And those 70 days were captured with equipment that captured content authenticity data, then edited in Photoshop. Some of these were stored on a blockchain for decentralized storage and preservation of history, and all of them have that same treatment. So you can click on that eye icon, you can see what tools were used to capture the provenance, who vouched for it, and then explore at any level of detail with full transparency what these things are. So I'll stop there. I'm always interested in conversing about this topic with Ron and anyone else in the audience, but I do hope that gave you a sense of what the CAI is all about, why Adobe is involved in it, and again, a call to action, as Ron indicated, is for any of you who have interest to join the Content Authenticity Initiative, get in touch and be part of it. And we certainly don't purport to understand all the potential uses of digital provenance technology, but there are many that we absolutely don't have on our radar, and especially when it comes to retail, to sports, to all of the things that you folks have a much deeper read on than I do or my team does. We'd love to hear from you and understand how this might apply, and in the most exciting of cases, even work together to bring this to your audiences. Thank you.